Excited. We are very anxious to hear your insights, your knowledge on the topic. The assault on the sports governing bodies by the Court of Justice of the European Union is a timely topic that is both important and fascinating. I'm convinced that today's webinar with Professor Mavroids will mark an important milestone in the history of our court. This is the first of many webinars we plan to hold in cooperation with foreign institutions. The second webinar will also be held online next week on February 4th at 11 a.m. with Professor Jennifer Rogers, also from Columbia Law School. Our goal is to internationalize our court and strengthen its ties with other institutions that play an important role in the global sports justice ecosystem. We are grateful to Columbia Law School in New York City for partnering with our court and the National School of Sports Justice, chaired by our esteemed colleague, Luis Felipe Boulos here. And before we begin, I would like to turn the floor over to Boulos, who will introduce our distinguished speaker. And thank you all for joining us for this event. And especially thank you for you, Gustavo Bon, for your work in making this event possible. Thank you, my friend.
Good morning, everyone. Professor, as our president said, it's an honor for us to have you with us today, and we'd like to thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and time. And I'm sure we'll have a very good morning and very good time with your class today. Thank you, and you can go ahead.
Ok. Muito obrigado pelo convite. Falarei em inglês por 20 minutos e depois responderei em perguntas, se há perguntas. So, the topic is about the recent decisions of the Court of Justice, but you can ask exactly the same question from the perspective of Brazil. And my main point here is that the sports governing bodies, FIFA and UEFA, have been exercising jurisdiction in areas where they have no mandate. Europe is probably a harbinger because this is the first, if you wish, quasi-state entity that took FIFA and UEFA to the court. But maybe Brazil might do the same in the years to come, applying Brazilian law, because as I'll show you, the key point here is that FIFA has moved and UEFA into areas where they have absolutely no mandate. And it is only normal that eventually they see their mandate checked by national jurisdictions. Now, with this in mind, I will focus on the decisions of since December 2023. Why since December? I'll show you that the Court of Justice has been challenging UEFA and FIFA institutions since the 80s. But now it moved into two things changed. First, it moved into hardcore areas of FIFA UEFA law. Key football legal institutions have been prejudged. And second, the Court of Justice now applies competition law, and you'll see why it matters so much. So where we are now, we are facing a fork on the road. It moved into, on the one hand, areas the monopoly of FIFA UEFA is put into question, has been put effectively into question, that's clear. And on the other, the voice is recommending that FIFA and UEFA are not an apt football legislator, have been proliferating. In Europe, it's common currency. Now, with this in mind, I'll do three things. First, I'll give you the background, why European law matters, and why it is a legitimate benchmark in Europe to discuss legality of FIFA UEFA actions. Second, I will try to explain what changed with the recent decisions, why I focus in the last 14 months. And third, although it's impossible to predict the future, me living in the US and having to face Trump, I can tell you it is quite impossible, but I will try to say 2 or 3 words about what I see as the emerging trends. Now, the background. Now, in the European Union, maybe the best is to start from this slide. I always wonder if this should come first. Anyway, I think for today, some reason I thought this is the best way to introduce my speech, if you wish. The European Union is an transnational entity, no? It doesn't have its own original powers. The powers of the European Union depend on a conferral by member states. If member states decide to have a common competition policy, so be it. There is a common competition policy. But once they decide that, they have a duty of loyalty. They must observe European Union law. And all member states must safeguard the institutional balance. The moment I say competition policy is common, it is not for the German Competition Authority to decide cases of European dimension. It is for the European Court of Justice. Now, with this in mind, let me go to the previous slide. When it comes to sports, the situation is complicated because Europe does not have competence over sport. It has what you call in EU law legalese support competence. What is support competence? Think of Italy or Portugal decides to spend a lot of money on education of young players below 15. If the European Union thinks this is worth it, then the European Union can go ahead and say, I will co-finance this Portuguese or Italian initiative. So Europe cannot lead, Europe can follow, but Europe cannot lead on sports. That's the first leg. But there is a very important second leg. The European Union is first and foremost a common market. A common market means, from a pure economics perspective, factors of production can circulate freely. So this business aspect of sports is intimately linked with the idea of Europe being a common market. A player leaving Belgium to go and play in Holland is a worker leaving one EU member state for another. The conditions for the transfer are discussed at the European Union level. That's one example. To give you another example, in Europe there is, I'm sure you know about it, the Champions League. So this is a competition run by UEFA where the top teams in Europe participate. Now, the Champions League has many followers. Many followers means there is a lot of money made through TV rights. Well, TV rights, to what extent they'll be centralized or not, is a question which affects competition. It's one thing for UEFA to negotiate the Champions League TV rights. It's a different thing for each club to have the power to do so. A decision whether it will be centralized or not is again a decision which falls under European Union competition law. So the bottom line is, although Europe has no competence on sports per se, because Europe regulates its common market, all business aspects of football have to observe European Union law. Gustavo, tá bem?
Perfeito, professor.
Now, the second point here is European Union law trumps national law. It's what I told you before. The moment we decide to assign a competence to Europe, the competence cannot be exercised at the national level. Now, if you take these 2 points together, every time where a national federation in Europe, the Italian, the Portuguese, Spanish federation, they transfer competence to UEFA or FIFA, they transfer it with a huge asterisk that UEFA, FIFA must observe European Union law because member states must observe European Union law, which means when UEFA and FIFA regulate and their regulation affects the European continent, European Union law is the benchmark for deciding on the legality of FIFA UEFA actions. Now, with this in mind, why have we reached the stage where there is an encroachment, if you wish, between UEFA, FIFA on the one hand and the European Union institutions on the other? If we go back in time, it took me a lot of time to understand what is going on, because quite frankly, neither UEFA, in my view, for whatever my view is worth, nor FIFA were very cooperative in unveiling to outsiders like myself their full negotiating history. But I think what I'm telling you now is pretty much the way the European courts understand the integration process of FIFA UEFA, and I think you can take it seriously. So the original mandate for UEFA was very simple: organize pan-European competitions. It was a pure transaction costs argument, nothing beyond that. Instead of, for example, Italy and Spain, and Italy and England and Portugal, and so on and so forth, deciding how to organize a pan-European competition of champions or cup winners, they assign the competence to UEFA, and UEFA organizes the competition. So originally there were two competitions, eventually the competitions grew up, but that's the idea of UEFA. Same thing for FIFA at the world level originally. But what happened next? Well, what happened next is UEFA and FIFA added to their competencies. Originally, they would decide things like how many players play in the team, how many games you play, 2 or 4 or whatever, how do you qualify to the next round, and so on. They would regulate football. They started slowly to regulate rules about football. That is, under what conditions a club can be licensed to participate in competitions, under what conditions you can stay in the competition or not stay in the competition. They moved on and on. Here I have a small, very brief list. We don't have to go through everything. Financial fair play, how should clubs deal with their finances, how should transfer fees be regulated, and so on and so forth. Even recently, football agents. Now, all of those things, all of these rules about football are rules which concern European business. And that's precisely why we started looking into disagreements, if you wish, between Europe and FIFA UEFA, and eventually disputes before the Commission and before the Court of Justice. So it is the tendency of UEFA and FIFA to move into these areas without, in the view of the European institutions, observing European Union law, which led to these disputes. Now, what changed with the recent decisions? My second point. You see, originally there were the disputes concerned nationality clauses like Bosman, you might have heard of it, homegrown players and so on, anti-doping and so on. And when the European Union was applying European Union law, it always applied it through the lens of sport specificity. This is important. Let me say how the term is understood in European Union law. You see, the rationale for sport specificity has to do with the economics of the market, of the sports market. Typical markets, say Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola, are zero-sum games. No, Pepsi-Cola would like to eliminate Coke and have all the clients, all the consumers buy Pepsi. But the football market is quite odd in the sense you need the competitor to produce the good. Botafogo cannot produce a football game by itself. It needs Palmeiras or Sao Paulo or Santos. Now, the moment you start viewing it from this lens, then you ask the question, well, can I apply antitrust in a case concerning Botafogo and Palmeiras the way I applied in Pepsi and Coke? No, because clearly you have to accept some cooperation which you don't like in your normal antitrust. Now, To give you a concrete example how the court applied sport specificity, one of the best known decisions of the court is the Bosman case. In the Bosman case, there was a totally irrational regulation of UEFA, which suggested that players, even at the end of their contract, could not leave their club. So take, for example, Neymar. Neymar has a contract until 2023 June, and June 2023, he wants to leave Botafogo and go and play in another team. According to the UEFA regulation, the new team would have to pay his old club money, even though he had no contract, and money in order for Neymar to leave. So in Bosman, the court said, you cannot do those things. End of the contract means the player is free. Now, that makes sense, but there is a problem, and the problem comes from sport specificity. What if Neymar is 18 years old and his team, let's say Curitiba, has been training Neymar between 12 and 18 and has been investing in Neymar for 6 years for Neymar to eventually play in the team and pay back the investment? Should we allow Neymar at the age of 18 at the end of the contract to leave just like Bosman? If yes, no one will have the incentive to invest in football. So the court says, I have to moderate, to mitigate Bosman here. Yes, at the end of the contract you can leave, but for young players, for trainees who are about to sign their first professional contract, there should be an obligation to pay the original club, the training club. And that was an expression of sport specificity, because otherwise nobody would be investing in the education of football. So the court has endorsed this concept and applies sport specificity to accommodate the specificities of the football market. Now, what happened since December 2023? You see, as I said before, the court can challenge UEFA FIFA through two distinct legal instruments. One is the so-called non-discrimination concerning free movement of production factor. Example, Italy cannot say, to give an example from a real case, Italy had legislation saying that within a team of cyclists, the leader and the people who follow, le peloton, they have to be of the same nationality, which clearly favored Italians, because the majority, you can imagine, of athletes in one team, you cannot import 5,000 from France, they were Italians. Court says, no, you cannot do those things, you have to give everybody a chance. So you have to be non-discriminatory when it comes to hiring cyclists. The moment you say non-discrimination, the maximum, you don't put into question the right to regulate, you put into question the discriminatory aspect of the measure, and by removing the discrimination, the sports governing body is compliant with EU law. The moment you move, though, to competition law and you address measures through competition law, you are essentially, and for all practical purposes, putting into question the right to regulate. That's exactly what happened in the first of these three cases. I'll speak only about the first and the third, so we leave a lot of time for the questions. In Super League, the question before the court was, does UEFA have the monopoly to organize pan-European competitions? How did this question come about? A few European clubs wanted to organize their own competition, which would be, if you wish, competition to Champions League. And they managed to persuade some of the most commercial clubs of Europe to follow them. UEFA did not even entertain the request. UEFA threatened these clubs with sanctions in case they did so. UEFA had no criteria for accepting or rejecting requests. It just threatened, says, you do this, you're out of everything we do at UEFA, and I will even get you out from national championships. Now, these guys went to a Spanish court. The Spanish court said the preliminary request for ruling by the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, and the Court of Justice decided in December 2023, and that was the first bombshell. Now, what did the court say in 2 words? The court said, UEFA here is not acting as a regulator. UEFA is acting as entrepreneur. What UEFA is doing is UEFA is protecting abusively its own competition. UEFA, if UEFA had good reasons, criteria, specific criteria, health of players, I don't know, everything that goes with it, safety and so on and so forth, that would allow UEFA to say no in justifiable manner, that would have been a different story. But the fact that UEFA had not even one single criterion on which requests could be approved led the court to decide that what UEFA was doing was an impermissible restriction of competition, which means UEFA, either it will find a solution with these clubs, or we should expect to see in the months, years to come, an alternative competition. I understand that as we speak, there are ongoing negotiations. God knows what will happen at the end, but the court definitely opened the door to alternative competitions and equally definitely told UEFA, you have no right to be a monopolist in this market. The second example is the last case. UEFA and FIFA oblige all clubs and players to take their disputes to CAS, the Court of Arbitration of Sports. This compulsory arbitration violates an old agreement between the Commission and UEFA and FIFA from 2001. But now the court, first in the ISU case, also December 2023, but also the Advocate General in the Seren case, which I cite here, the opinion of the Advocate General is the proposition, if you wish, by one member of the court to decide in a particular way. The Seren Advocate General opinion came out last week. If you want, I can send you the full, but you can, if you put Seren Court of Justice on the internet, it comes out right away. In the Seren case, the Advocate General suggested that CAS decisions have no res judicata in Europe, which means that from now on, those who go to CAS, the Court of Arbitration of Sports, an arbitral body in Lausanne, in Switzerland, those who go to CAS, they should know that to the extent that their disputes involve European Union law, they risk seeing their dispute being relitigated before European courts. This is very recent, so we have to wait and see what will happen. This I explained. So what should we expect next? Well, the first thing I think we can expect is UEFA and FIFA have to rethink. They're already negotiating to what extent they will have accept an alternative competition or not. The second thing they will have to rethink is their transfer system, because in October 2024, the fourth decision, the court said all of the transfer system of FIFA violates European competition law because the enforcement mechanism that FIFA puts in place is disproportionate to the objective pursued and makes it almost impossible for players to move during their contract. Now, last week I was in England. That's why I'm in Europe now. Briefly, I have to go back to New York soon. Last week I was in England speaking at the House of Lords on what is happening with exactly more or less what I'm telling you. And the questions concerned what should be the role of social partners. So the English are quite clear. They move ahead. They establish an independent football regulator. The law will be passed between now and the summer. the football regulator will regulate football from A to Z, no matter what FIFA, UEFA say. And I think this is the first, you can never predict the future, the first of many similar initiatives in Europe. They will try to reduce FIFA and UEFA. Nobody says they should not exist, but they will try to reduce FIFA and UEFA into, let's say, sporting issues and away from the regulation of business issues. The other point where I see lots of initiatives emerging in Europe is people are becoming more and more skeptical of the arbitration mode of CAS, the Court of Arbitration of Sport. For the European Court of Justice, it is clear that the CAS falls short of the requirements of an independent adjudicatory body. Now, the criticism against FIFA and UEFA, in one sentence, is that they confuse their functions. They are not acting like a regulator where you have clear distinction between administrative, then you have someone else who will be the executive and a judiciary. All three come under the same roof. This is unacceptable for the European Union public order. Now, I see then the frontal attack on two different fronts, if you wish. One, how much they regulate, clear. Two, who should adjudicate? And I will leave you with these thoughts. As I said, Europe clearly moves in this direction. What Brazil will do or others remains to be seen. Estou pronto. Há perguntas ou não há perguntas?
Eu vou me arriscar aqui, professor. I'll try this in English, okay?
Sim.
So first of all, thank you so much for being here with us. It was very enlightening, your speech, and very, I think, controversial, at least the last part, when you addressed CAS and the European Union kind of regulation over sports justice. You might have already answered my question, but I will try and see if, I don't know, you can elaborate a little bit more on the topic, or if you have any further thoughts. So do you believe there has been an excessive regulation, or at least an excessive attempt at regulation or control by the European Court of Justice regarding sports justice? And you mentioned that recently the Advocate General of the European Court of Justice delivered this kind of bombastic opinion stating that a domestic court, right, is not required to recognize the res judicata effect of CAS awards when a question of EU law is involved. And furthermore, as you well pointed out also, it was suggested that any award resulting from mandatory arbitration, such as CAS again, might fall outside the scope of the New York Convention, which is a very important norm regulation for international arbitration worldwide, including in Switzerland, for instance, where you are now. So my question would be, do you see this as a potential threat to sports justice in any way? I mean, what the European Court of Justice has been doing?
So first of all, I was explaining what the court said. I will tell you my opinion about CAS now. No, so it is in the eyes of the court, CAS has no legitimacy when it comes to interpreting European Union law. The court did not say that CAS cannot adjudicate a dispute between a player from Uzbekistan and a club in Tajikistan, which are not EU members. They can do whatever they want. They said, but the moment you start using European Union law, I have the monopoly of interpretation. You have no right, and this is consistent. It's not anti-CAS. The court has done exactly the same thing with the European Court of Human Rights, a very serious court, no? Now, why did the court do that? You see, last year, there was a very odd litigation before CAS. FIFA went ahead and regulated the market of agents. And in its regulation, FIFA went for a cap on the fees of agents. Some FIFA people will defend this, saying, well, the US does the same thing. Yes, but the US requested an antitrust exemption from the US. FIFA never requested an antitrust exemption from the European legal order. Never. So what happened next was there was a litigation before CAS, and the CAS resolved the dispute using European Union law as benchmark. Not FIFA law, but EU law. Then you had a flurry of cases before German courts mainly concerning the same issue. And all of the courts suggested the same thing. The CAS decision is wrong, and the FIFA regulation is a horizontal restraint of trade, like any price regulation, hence violates European competition law. What happened next was FIFA stopped enforcing its agents regulation. Not in Brazil, not in the US, not anywhere. Now that's what hit the court very hard. And they said, stop, these guys now are using European Union law as benchmark for their cases. At least if they do it under FIFA statutes, I don't care, but they cannot move into an area where I'm the exclusive interpreter. Now, if you ask me, I think the European Union reaction is normal. I mean, they do it with every court. They say, I don't want two interpretations of EU law, because then what will respondents do? They might have to face two different decisions on the same issue. But if you also ask me, is there a room for a CAS? I would say yes. They should find a way to have a CAS within the European Union legal order, because the big advantage of a CAS-type adjudication procedure is fast procedure. You don't have to wait for 3 to 5 years. You have the dispute resolved within a year, more or less. I had some statistics. I tried to find actually very reliable statistics concerning CAS, and without vulgarizing, but definitely simplifying, I would say if we make a distinction between doping and other cases are resolved within 13 months, and doping take a little bit longer, which is quite fast. So this aspect of CAS, I'm all in favor, but it has to be streamlined within the European Union legal order. Otherwise, I'm afraid there is no future in CAS jurisdiction when it comes to European, when it affects the European legal order. Tá bem, Gustavo?
Well, may I?
Muito obrigado, professor.
May I? Well, I'm José Maria Filomeno. I'm also a member of our superior soccer's legal court, and it's first of all, I want to express I am extremely pleased to take part of this seminar given by Professor Maurovitz. Is that the way it pronounces?
More or less.
Yeah, sure. Okay, from the prestigious University of Columbia in New York City, for which I would like also to thank the professor for his willingness to pass on his knowledge and all he knows about sports law and sports courts worldwide, as he's done now. And I would also like to thank our president of our court, Luis Otávio, for and the president of our school of sports legislative law, my friend Luis Boulos, for the initiative. What I can say is that in respect of the competence of our sports justice in Brazil, which Brazil is a country of enormous judicial activism, highly It's a country highly judicialized. Many conflicts of competence and jurisdictions is due to the, and we have a perfect organization. The competence in the jurisdictions of the sports courts, they stay apart of all of these conflicts because the competence and the way we are organized. We have local courts in each state, very well organized, and we have our superior court, which works as an appeal court and also has the jurisdiction for the national competitions conflicts. But all of that is just works perfectly because we follow the procedures of the due process of law with complete rights of defense and very agility in solving the cases. This is what gives credibility to all those involved and guarantees respectability to sports justice here in Brazil. What I ask you is it known worldwide for those who study, who work with sports justice, how competent and how respectable is the sports justice in Brazil, especially for soccer? That's my question.
Well, honestly, you know, I don't know much about the. It's true that there are not many cases that go. I was checking actually before the talk how many Brazilian cases go to CAS, and it's mainly football cases, nothing else. I didn't see any other sporting cases. There was one basketball case from the beginning of the CAS 30 years back, and that's all. So I assume you must be doing a good job there. Otherwise, people would be going to CAS every day.
Yep.
Which happens, I mean, with other countries. There are other countries where the domestic jurisdiction does not manage to absolve the majority of disputes. And I think that's a very nice proxy to understand the quality of adjudication in a country. How many cases seep through and end up in CAS and end up before CAS, yeah. I have no other proxy. I mean, I don't know. I wish Gustavo will let me know more about how it works in Brazil.
Are you so far invited to come here to visit our
He didn't invite me.
report?
He didn't invite me.
We can
I don't know what he's telling you, but he didn't invite me.
The work we do.
I will come if he invites me. He didn't.
I don't have that power, but Luis has.
I have a question. I don't know if I can move on in my question. So, Dr. Petros, this is, I'm João Marcos. I'm a prosecutor of the sports court. And I'm just gonna, again, and I'm gonna reproduce again all the words that everyone that said here about your speech, about your thoughts, very insightful. But I wanna hold in this general advocate opinion and to know your thoughts about the future of arbitration, especially in CAS. As far as I can read in the decision, there's one thing in between lines in this opinion, which was issued by the general advocate, which is we have local courts, we have the final decision. This is basically the summary that I can found in the decision issued by the general advocate. So this brings me such a concern in terms of the future of the sports arbitration, because if we are taking into account that all the CAS decisions can be changed by local courts in the future, that gives to me at least some, awareness in terms of future. So my question to you is, what is your opinion about the future of sports arbitration and what's going to take place in the future? This is my point that I want to hold with you.
Yeah, it is an excellent point. Excellent point. I don't know what will happen in the future. I can tell you what I would recommend to Elefantino, the head of FIFA, if I was his advisor. I'm not. Or to Seferin at UEFA. I would recommend that they stop regulating beyond clearly sporting rules. It doesn't make sense for FIFA to regulate the agents market in the world. Brazil is a big market with agents, football is religion, has its own tradition, and so on and so forth. It cannot have the same rules on agents as Switzerland, which is a very small market with very few players, and so on and so forth. These questions should stay with national authorities. There is nothing wrong with Brazil having its own competition law, its own transfer regulation, its own. If FIFA does that, there is no problem with adjudication because the disputes that will go to CAS will be on a very narrow area which needs to be harmonized. But FIFA and UEFA recently, but especially FIFA, have this, I don't know if it is megalomania, I don't know how to explain it in better terms, to regulate everything for everyone in the same way. It cannot be. I mean, just think about it. If we forget law for a second, when I was doing economics before law, one of the first things I learned in my microeconomics classes was prices are endogenous. If I have a very wealthy market, prices will be much higher than in a very poor market. I come from Switzerland. When I'm not teaching in New York, I come home in Switzerland. When I come to Switzerland and I go to buy milk, I pay 10. When I'm in Brazil, although Gustavo did not invite me this time, I pay 2. For good reasons. How on earth, based on this, you can say I will have the same regulation on all those issues across? And that's what creates the problems. It's this craziness to establish, for FIFA to become a global legislator of football. It should not. Stick to what you know best. And what you know best is the sporting issues. Leave all the other issues. That's problem 1. And problem 2, and I stop here because I've spoken too much, it's think about it. In Brazil is a democracy. When you decide to regulate on agents, you will invite the agents, you'll invite the players, it will go to the parliament, you'll have discussions, you will end up with a legislation which you can challenge before Brazilian courts. When FIFA regulates agents, where did you see this discussion across social partners? It all happens behind closed doors. They invited 3 associations of agents, as if this is all that matters, 2 of them from Europe, nobody from Latin America, North America, Asia, and so on and so forth, and they ended up deciding on how the end. This is crazy. And that's what, in my view, creates the problems.
Perfect. Very clear. Thank you.
Hi, Professor. Can you hear me?
Sim, muito bem.
Professor, my question was in line to the concern raised by Dr. João Marcos. Hi, João Marcos. So I'd just like to make a comment here. Professor, your presentation raised a number of questions about the balance between the autonomy of soccer's governing bodies and the courts of common jurisdiction. I believe that a lot of part of the autonomy of the soccer administration is actually it's exercised by the sports justice system, and I'm a little skeptical about the intervention events by the common jurisdiction. Actually, in other hand, I believe that these events will become increasingly common. What do you think about it?
Well, honestly, I'm not a fan at all, actually, of this FIFA idea of no political interference and so on. To me, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about it. When FIFA speaks to the national football federations, I have data, close to 82% are public institutions. These are political bodies, ministries of sports. By definition, they speak to people who are in the political dialogue. How on earth can you go then and say, I don't want political interference? But these guys are politicians.
Yeah.
To start with. Second, should FIFA decide, where does FIFA derive the right to tell Brazil This is how the Brazilian state will regulate its relations with its Ministry of Sport and its Football Federation. When did Brazil transfer this competence to FIFA? But actually, I can go further than that because I had one Brazilian student years back who I asked this question. I said, can the Brazilian Football Federation transfer it? He says, no, they cannot, because they are subjected to the... I mean, this is crazy what FIFA is doing. And then they come and they say, I'm the global legislator. No, they have no mandate for those things. And honestly, in this respect, I'm on the side of the European Court of Justice 100%. This, it is for Brazil, for Argentina, for Europe, for the US to decide on how they regulate their football. It is for FIFA and UEFA to regulate the sporting issues concerning international competitions. Nobody gave them the mandate to decide how Brazil should regulate its football within Brazil. No one.
Thank you, Professor.
Obrigado.
Alguém mais tem perguntas, pessoal? Professor, in this case, I want to thank you so much again for accepting our invitation. Thank you to Gustavo Vaughan for your work to make it possible, and invite all here to the next webinar that will be held online on February 4.
I think he's frozen.
Yeah, by the way, I just want to acknowledge that Professor Jennifer Rogers, our next lecturer and our next guest, is here. So thank you, Professor Rogers, for being here with us today.
Muito bem.
Luis Otávio, your voice was frozen in the last, I think, 15, 20 seconds. If you can just say it again.
Okay, Filomeno, I was just thanking Professor Petros Mavroides for accepting our next webinar that will be online on February 4 at 11 a.m. with Professor Jennifer Rogers, also from Columbia Law School. So thank you all, and thank you, Gustavo Vaughan, for work.
Obrigado. Até já.
Até já.
Até já.
Até já.
Obrigado.
Obrigado, pessoal. Obrigado pela presença. Vamos fomentar esse tipo de iniciativa.
Sim.
Agradecer novamente aqui ao Gustavo.